welcome to the Personal Injury Law Show. This show talks about everything current in the law of personal injuries and relevant to you, the viewer. My name's Tony Carbone. I'm a personal injury lawyer. I've over 30 years' experience. With me tonight, I've got a partner in a law firm specialised in workers' compensation, John Karantzis.
Hi, Tony. Hi, viewers.
And also a partner in a law firm specialised in transport accidents, Don McGhie.
Good evening, Tony. Good evening, viewers.
Tonight, viewers, we've got an absolutely must-see episode on the plight and also interaction of ambulances with the Victorian community. So stay tuned for that.
However, Tony, what's in the news?
John, there's a lot of stories in the news, but I want to start off with this one in America. This is right up your alley, Don. In Denver, a 1-year-old was left in the car alone by his father. His father went to drop off a friend at his grandmother's home and the car was towed away. Now, tell me something. Is this going to be the most extreme case of stupidity you've ever seen?
So towed away with the child still in the car?
Yes.
What's on whose part? The parents, the father for leaving the kid in the car, or the tow truck driver?
Everyone.
With the
Everyone
kid in the car?
Everyone.
It just
Everyone.
sounds so stupidity.
It's just bizarre.
Yeah, look, unfortunately, something's all too common now, isn't it, leaving kids in cars? And actually, we see there's a lot of articles and campaign and all that, that it's very dangerous to leave kids in the car, besides the stupidity case. But
I don't think it's a case of only in America, is it?
No.
John, can I ask you this? Assuming this child rolled down and suffered serious injuries, would the tow truck driver be responsible for those injuries?
Oh, there will be liability on behalf of the on the part of the tow truck driver and maybe the police, Tony.
Okay.
If the police were involved and directing the tow truck driver to tow the car away, well then yes.
Okay. And also, what about the father of the car? If this was in Victoria, Don, the child would still be covered under the Transport Accident Act, surely.
If it was an accident caused by the driving of the vehicle, yes.
What about the use of a vehicle?
Well, the use of a vehicle, if there's use of a vehicle, then you might have a different type of claim.
But it sounds to me that you've got reasonable options there.
Oh yeah, there's options in litigation, yes.
Okay, apart from the fact that the mother will want to kill the father, that's another issue.
On top of that.
Okay. Let's talk about this sign crash combo claim, Don. John, what's the facts of this?
We've got a motorcyclist driving along the road and he's hit a real estate board sign that's lying on the road. Suffers severe injuries. As a result, he's now issued proceedings in the Supreme Court of Victoria claiming physical and psychological damages. Tony, it's a big claim. It's a loss of earnings and pain and suffering claim.
Well, let me go to the person that issued proceedings. Don, what are the injuries?
Oh, look, the injuries, there's a multiple of injuries. I mean, we can't really comment because we've just started, we just issued proceedings. But look, it has affected his work life and obviously has caused him pain and suffering.
Okay.
I think that in this case, you've got a real estate agent board, which is all too common. You drive past on the road, you'll see all these signs on the side, be it real estate, in this case, probably real estate, or just advertising boards. And it's so easy just to knock over and cause an injury like this.
So,
well, John, liability is not an issue, surely.
Exactly. The real estate agent is responsible for taking care of that signage and ensuring that it doesn't fly off onto the road. Tony.
Exactly. Look, we'll come back to this in due course because, as Don said, rightfully said, it's before the court, so we've got to be careful what we can and can't say.
Yes.
All right, let's move on. This is probably a bane on every litigator's life, where you've got clients that are on their social media pages and blogs talking about their life situations, Don and John, where they're embellishing what goes on in their lives, probably not truthfully. They overcook it.
Yes.
And then they seriously damage their claims.
Yes.
What can you tell us about the facts of this case, Don?
Well, this one involved a young girl in Queensland. She was 17 when she had an accident and hurt her back. And she brought a claim when she was 23, or was 23 at the time, claiming damages for her injuries sustained in that transport accident. Now, the judge, it was before a judge, so no jurors, just before a judge. The judge heard evidence about her Facebook blogging, which was very inconsistent with the story that she tried to paint before the judge.
Well, she got lucky because a lot of the ones we've seen, John, have actually failed, haven't they?
Yeah, yes, exactly. Justice North found that her name was Ms. Ritano. She's basically exaggerated on Facebook and on blogging, wasn't she, Tony? She was basically painting a picture whereby, in actual fact, it wasn't the case.
No. She did get compo, and she's lucky because a lot of ones we've seen have actually failed outright.
I have to admit, I'm surprised. $140,000 for economic loss and loss of superannuation payments. But the judge found that in part of the claim, she was alleging that she's suffering from pain and suffering and consequences as a result of the transport accident. But then you go to her social websites and she's having a party, Tony.
Of course.
But in this
maybe
case,
she isn't. She's just playing it up.
Well,
I think she was having a party. But in this case, it actually went beyond just blogging, saying socially out there and all this stuff. She started saying things like she bought a house, which she never did. Yep. She started saying that she's planning a trip to overseas, which she never planned. And also said that she had a job offer.
This is something that we should do as an episode in itself.
Well, I think it's all too common. Every time we do the show, we're talking about Facebook.
Well, look, I want to send a message to the viewers here. If you want to destroy your cases, and I'm talking about destroying your cases, not about reducing your value of the claim, go onto social media when you're injured. Between Twitter and Facebook, you will definitely destroy your cases. You agree?
Invariably, Tony, whatever you put on that public domain, Twitter and Facebook in particular, will be used against you in a court of law.
And insurers can get their hands on that information.
Well, they do,
exactly.
and it's a new type of surveillance.
Exactly.
You don't have to pay someone to go film you. You just go on the web and look up Facebook and your social media.
It's the best form of surveillance because you're spilling your guts.
Well, you're spilling, literally, and you're showing a picture of your life which is not in accordance with what you're saying to the court.
Car dooring.
Yes.
This is something that happens every day of the week.
But it does. Dooring involves where you open a door and a cyclist runs into a door. So you open a door into a cyclist, whichever way. In this case, there's a dooring incident that occurred. Passengers getting out of a taxi, and what happened was that the passengers refused to hand over the details to the cyclist that was hit by the door.
So every time you open your car door, you have to look now to make sure that you don't hit a cyclist.
That's right. I mean,
well, John, it happens a lot. There's about 400 cases a year in Victoria alone.
If you open a car door, just reading here, in direct path of cyclists, the fine is $352.
The onus is very high, isn't it, Tony?
I think we've got to be careful because I'll tell you what, if they miss the door and hit you, you are in an absolutely diabolical state.
So there's no onus on the cyclist to maybe take care and slow down?
They've got to be travelling at a reasonable speed.
Well, what's the reasonable speed in Collins Street, which is full of cars?
It's an issue.
It's an issue. At the same time, if you're cycling, you approach a vehicle, you don't expect the door just to open.
No.
I mean, how much?
No.
Yeah,
but in this incident, the cyclist is going on the left of the taxi, next to the curb, squeezing through that much room. I mean, is that reasonable?
No, John, I think they're more talking about, people just throwing their doors open.
That's fine, but in this incident, that's the way it occurred.
Bus drivers want cages. Is that appropriate?
Tony, there's more and more incidences of bus drivers being assaulted, being physically threatened, being psychologically abused and bullied. I think it's come to the time whereby cages are installed to protect the bus drivers from a menacing public.
Do you agree, Don?
I agree. I mean, it's a sort of a question I ask is what's happening to society? I mean, when bus drivers are threatened, I remember catching school bus, you befriended the bus driver, get to know him and all that, and now they're under threat. So
it's just change of time.
It is a change of time.
Viewers, we've got to go to a sponsors break. After the break, we're going to have Steve McGhie, who's the Victorian Secretary of Ambulances Employees Australia. So please stay tuned. It's going to be a riveting episode. Viewers, welcome back to the show. As I said at the start, we're very fortunate tonight to have the Victorian Secretary of Ambulance Employees Australia, Steve McGhie. Good evening, Steve.
Good evening, Tony.
Viewers, Steve McGhee's been the Secretary since 1995. He's a former AMBO of 15 years, so he's very experienced to tell us about the plight of ambulances, ambulance workers and interaction with society. Steve, in your day-to-day travels, tell us what you do.
Well, as the Secretary of the Union, I represent ambulance paramedics across the state of Victoria and also other ambulance employees that work in various roles behind the scenes for the ambulance service. And my role is hopefully to protect the conditions of ambulance paramedics and other ambulance employees, but also to make sure that the ambulance service, the government fund the ambulance service enough and have appropriate resource levels that can respond to the community of Victoria.
John, just on the issue of resource levels, this is a big issue that's been going on for some time, and we've had a lot of examples of ambulances not getting to the scene in time or ambulances not getting out there full stop. What about the fact that at the moment the base pay for an ambulance employee is $56,000? Do you think that's appropriate?
I'm speechless. $56,000 for an ambulance officer with 6 years' experience. Someone that's trained to save people's lives. I can't believe how low it is, especially when South Australian ambulance officers are receiving almost $13,000 more per year.
Okay. Now, let's just bring the picture right up to speed. Steve, if you've been working for 6 years as an ambulance officer and you also do some overtime and other things, you can earn up to $71,000 a year. Is that correct?
The $71,000 is made up of shift penalties, so they get a $56,000 base figure, and then they do a whole range of different shift work over the course of the year, and that includes 10, 12, 14-hour shifts. 14-hour shifts are night shifts. They work weekends, public holidays. So that additional money is paid for shift penalties only, and then they do some overtime, which would be on top of that. Sometimes it's forced overtime because obviously if you get a late job towards the end of your shift, you're bound that you have to do it. And they can be held up for 1, 2, 3 hours at a time trying to complete that case.
What's the average hours that an AMBO works in Victoria?
Generally speaking, their average working week is 42 hours a week. And then sometimes, on top of that, they'd probably do an averaging of some overtime during the course of every week, probably at least between 2 and 10 hours overtime per week.
Okay. In Victoria, we're probably 150 plus million short in terms of budget, and we probably need an extra 300 plus paramedics / ambos.
Well, Tony, this is part of Steve's campaign and battle with the NAPFine Liberal government, isn't it, Steve?
Yeah, it is. I mean, obviously we're in a wages dispute at the moment with the government, but it's not only just about wages, it's about providing a better ambulance service, and the only way that you can do that is have more paramedics. And of course, we've just put a budget submission into the government where we've sought an additional 267 paramedics in this next 12 months. And then a further 150 transport officers that can transport the lower acuity patients. So, it's quite a significant increase that we're seeking over a 12-month period, but we think that's desperately needed so ambos can get to patients.
The Liberal government have made an offer to you that's been rejected.
It has been rejected.
What do you want?
Well, let me explain the offer very quickly. They've offered 6%, 3%, 3% over the next 3 or 4 years. They've offered a $1,500 sign-on fee. And they've also agreed to a consent arbitration on a work valley, so we let the Fair Work Commission decide on what paramedics really should be paid. But for that, they want trade-offs, and the trade-offs they want is to take a half a dozen conditions away from paramedics. And I'm talking vital conditions, the way that they receive their shift penalties, the meal breaks. They want to make it harder for paramedics to get a meal break during their 10, 12 and 14-hour shifts. They want to change the overtime rate for part-time employees, so they want to affect part-time employees and pay them cheaper when they bring them in for additional shifts. They're some of the things that they want to take away from paramedics. So they're the sticking points in regard to the disagreement that we have with the government. We don't want to have to trade off those conditions that are fundamental to paramedics surviving in the job. We want to be able to work through those issues, not have those 6 items arbitrated, and we can all move on then.
John, traditionally, what was your understanding of when you'd ring an ambulance? When would you ring an ambulance?
Tony, when it's a life-threatening emergency situation.
Well, the problem we're having these days, viewers, is that you've got people ringing up ambulances for cuts, abrasions, bruises, falling off chairs, ladders, and they're not life-threatening. They're probably nasty injuries. So, getting back to you, Steve, essentially what's happened is our funding in the hospitals has dropped off, correct?
That's right, yes.
There's a shortage of doctors, John?
And ambulance officers and ambulances.
So, Steve, is it your impression that a lot of things that traditionally would have been done by the average person by going to the hospital, now they're ringing up an ambulance because there's a perception out there that if they ring an ambulance, you'll be treated a lot quicker. Is that correct?
There's no doubt that there's an element of the community that think if they can pick up the phone, they'll get some response. So you ring 000 and you'll always get a response. And they think that if they get an ambulance, they'll be seen quicker at the hospital. But of course, we have gridlock at hospitals on a daily basis right across the state of Victoria. Our major hospitals generally are gridlocked because of the volume of people coming in the door.
We've also got the situation of ramping.
Well, ramping happens daily right across the state. We've calculated that the current figures at the moment, that there's that much ramping up going across the state of Victoria. There's about 18 ambulances ramped up at every hour of the day, every day of the year. It's about 13,000 hours per month of ramping up.
Well, that's where my understanding is where ambulances are simply parked at the front of hospitals with patients inside waiting to be treated.
That's right. Ramping is queuing up at hospitals. So paramedics take their patients into an ED department and they just line up in the corridor. They can't offload their patient off the ambulance trolley because there is no bed to put the patient into. And you can have up to 11, 12 ambulances ramped up at any one time. Sometimes they've had to put the patient back in the ambulance because it's been too uncomfortable to have them in the corridor.
Is it a lack of beds or cooperation with the hospitals, Steve?
Look, it's a lack of beds. And probably a lack of staff in the hospitals. The staff that work in the hospitals are flat out. They can't do any more than what they possibly are doing now. But there is nowhere to put the patients unless you put them on the floor. And no paramedic will do that. And if you can't find a bed, some people are being put into the waiting room in a chair because that's the only location that the hospital can place them. And sometimes that's inappropriate.
John, I might be out of line here, but why can't an ambulance officer get to the hospital, make a determination that the patient's not in a life-threatening situation, just offload the patient in a chair and say, guys, I'm going. Because then it's up to the triage group or team at the hospital to make determinations of the person's stability and or whether there's life-threatening situations.
In the end, Tony, all those chairs may already be filled up.
Yeah.
There simply may not be enough room in the hospital, and that's what it looks like, isn't it, Steve?
That's right, John. Look, the other thing is there's a risk. No paramedic will leave their patient unless they're attended to by some medical staff, and ambos are not going to take the risk. The hospitals are not going to take the risk. There may not be the triage nurse available to be able to assess that patient because they're run off their feet.
Viewers, we've got to go to a sponsors break, so please stay tuned. After the break, we'll come back to this very, very delicate issue of the ambulance services in Victoria. Jules, welcome back to the show. We're talking to Steve McGhie and John Karantzis about this issue of the ambulances in Victoria. Steve, tell me about this problem with the fentanyl. You've got about 800 volunteers in Victoria, and there was an issue about fentanyl being stolen, by whom we don't know, and people were getting injected with water. What was that all about?
Look, fentanyl is a drug that's been introduced to the ambulance service in the last few years, and it's a pain reliever and quite a highly addictive pain reliever. There's two ways of administering fentanyl, and that is up the nose, so intranasal, or through IV lines. As I say, it's quite an effective drug, and we've had situations, I think probably 6 or 7 occasions, where the ambulance service have had that drug stolen from ambulance branches. In the past, some people have been caught and been charged and been dealt with both by the ambulance service and by the courts. And we've got some recent events that are happening, happening at the moment, where there's investigations going on in 2 locations. Volunteers around the state, yes, there's 800. Some of those volunteers will be able to administer that drug. It is very risky. And one of the problems that we have, and this is what we've raised with the ambulance service, is the underpinning causes of why maybe paramedics or ambulance employees are taking this drug, and that is that they've been so stressed and anxious and depressed by the type of work that they do, or injured by the type of work that they do, that they resort to having a go at this drug, and then it captures them. They become addicted to it, and then, of course, when someone becomes addicted, then anything happens.
So,
John,
Steve, we've got a situation where 19 patients were administered saline, which is water, in a situation where they needed pain relieving medication. It's not good, is it?
No, it's not. Certainly, it's not the ideal situation, and it goes against the grain of the professionalism of paramedics. There's no question about that. And fortunately, by being injected the saline, that's not going to put those patients at risk.
Yes.
But they didn't get the pain relief they required. And although there are other pain relievers that paramedics can rely on, morphine and also penthrane is another pain relievers that they can use. But yes, it's not an ideal situation that those 19 patients were affected.
Would you be happy to be treated by a volunteer?
Look, Tony, it depends. I don't know. What are their qualifications, Steve?
Look, the volunteers are trained by the ambulance service. They get first aid training to Certificate 2, Certificate 3 level.
Okay.
They're well supported by the ambulance service. They do a very good job in the areas around mainly rural Victoria. And in some cases, you don't have professional paramedics in parts of rural Victoria, and that's all you will get, and that is these volunteers.
Do you get paid?
I guess
some of the volunteers get paid. What they call the ambulance community officers, once they're called out by the ambulance service, they do receive a payment.
All right.
I guess my first reaction is no, Tony. But at the same time, given the qualifications, if my life was on the line, yes, please.
Yeah, okay, let me put this to you then. Assuming the call to the ambulance service is heart attack, possible stroke, or some other life-threatening situation,
Yes.
would you want to be treated by a volunteer?
Oh, if that was there was no other choice, yes.
I think that's right. I mean, with full credit to the volunteers, they are trained up to be able to deal with those life-threatening situations to try and maintain and keep you viable until professional paramedics arrive.
Ideally, I want a paramedic.
Okay.
And that's really where it comes back to the government to ensure the right amount of funding, doesn't it, Tony?
Exactly. There was a massive meltdown, Steve. 22nd of January 2014, 2,500 calls on a Friday for help. It would have been a very, very hot day, I presume.
Yes, that's right.
And your organisation couldn't keep up with the calls.
Well, 2,500 calls per day is an enormous amount of calls, and obviously, with the heat, people topple over in the heat because of heat exhaustion. They don't quite look after themselves. They stay hydrated, things like that. So you get many, many more calls. Unfortunately, at the time, the ambulance service put on some additional resources, but it wasn't enough, and of course, they couldn't meet the demand.
Okay. Were there many deaths?
Look, that'll come out from the coroner. Okay. We find in the heat wave situation that there is quite a significant increase in the death of patients because of the heat wave. 14th
of February, do you recall this one? 2 young men died waiting for ambulances and there was a confrontation with David Davis and Greg Sasala. Do you recall that one?
Look, I am aware of it. I believe it was an opening of the new branch at Melton where David Davis attended and the CEO, Greg Sasala, attended. There was a bit of a protest there by the family of 2 young boys that died last year because of a delayed response to both of them. One had an asthma attack and the other one, I think, cardiac arrested on a soccer court, indoor soccer court. And the parents expressed their grief and displeasure with the ambulance service and the government's provision of ambulances to their family member.
Steve, what's the next step with your battle against the Napthine government?
Well, we're currently campaigning, and as you've probably seen, all the ambulances driving around with the writing on the windows and our members in red T-shirts. And look, we've got no further negotiations scheduled at the moment. The last one that we had was on the 12th of March. Nothing else has been scheduled with the government and Ambulance Victoria. We're hopeful that that will change in the very near future. The government did make an offer back in November. Nothing's changed since then. They haven't moved since then. They've offered 6, 3 and 3, as I said earlier, but what they want is paramedics to give up conditions, and that's the sticking point at the moment. So we'll keep out there publicly campaigning, we'll keep out there rallying against the government until we can get them to change their minds.
Steve, what's your counter-offer?
Well, as I say...
They need more members.
We need more members, but as I say, if we can get them to release the pressure on trying to take away important conditions of paramedics, then we might be able to reach an agreement with them.
John, you're a lawyer. What's the situation with the changes to the transport accident laws as of last year? How does it affect the ambulance services and fire
ambulance
brigades?
Services, firefighters, anyone in that type of field now, it's been drastically affected. Their rights to sue for common law damages has almost been destroyed.
What for post-traumatic stress and psychiatric conditions, is that correct?
Exactly.
Is that the view of the union, Steve?
Look, we have major concerns about that change to the legislation, and certainly on an off-duty situation where paramedics have an expectation, or the services and the government have an expectation that off-duty paramedics would stop at a scene, and if they suffer post-traumatic stress, that under the TAC legislation they're not going to be able to claim for common law damages, is my understanding.
Sorry, Steve, the criteria is so stringent these days. What would you suggest to the average person working for the ambulance services or fire brigade if they're involved in a situation where they are affected?
Medical treatment from a registered psychologist or psychiatrist is of paramount importance, Tony.
But it's also got to affect your social activities, your work capacity. There's all these stringent requirements. You'd want them to get advice, wouldn't you?
Exactly. You need to see a lawyer, someone expert in the transport accident system. Otherwise, well, you'll be left in the lurch.
Steve, this is an episode that isn't sufficient to really cover all the twists and turns and angles and all the dramas that have been going on in our society involving your organisation and the state government and possibly the federal government, because the funding's got to start at the top, I would have thought. Yeah. So we'll probably have to get you back in the future. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Because the show's moved on pretty quick.
Yeah. Look, I just thank you for having me on, and look, I'm more than happy to come back at any other time and answer any particular type of questions regarding the ambulance service and trying to provide good services to the state of Victoria and have proper funding from governments, all levels of governments, just provide good services to the government, to the people of Victoria, and also look after the workers of this state, and that includes my members, the paramedics.
Exactly.
So, Tony and Steve, my view, paramedics, ambulance officers, firefighters, they're all doing a great job, and we should really be supporting them.
Well, they're such an important part, an integral part of our society.
Exactly.
Without them, there'd be a lot more deaths.
Exactly.
And sadly, we do need to look after them.
And it's a tough job.
It is a very tough job. And for the amount of money that they get paid, I wouldn't do it for quids. I don't know about you, John.
Yeah.
Viewers, would love your Facebook and Twitter comments on this topic. It's very, very contentious. We'd also like you to have a look at our website, go back to past episodes, stay tuned for future episodes, and always remember to stay safe.